Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here today. Morgan Housel, partner at Collaborative Fund and author of the bestseller, The Psychology of Money, and same as ever, Morgan Housel, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Today we are here because went out in Italy, your last book, same as ever, that obviously I have to mention it in Italy, that is Come Sempre, Tutto Cambia, Niente Cambia, published by Oepli. And I would like to ask you some question on it. So if it's possible, I would like to ask you some questions.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's start with the first one that is related to risk, because in your book, you suggest that we should manage and deal with risk as the state of California deal with earthquakes. So in terms of financial market, how should a normal investor deal with the risk?
Well, what I meant by dealing with financial risk in the same way that people think about earthquakes is that if you live in California or in parts of Italy, you know there's going to be earthquakes in the future. You know with 100% certainty there's going to be big, and some of them will be big and devastating, but nobody has any idea when. It could happen today. It might not happen for another 25 or 50 or 100 years. You have no idea when it's going to come. And I think it's the same in the economy all over the world, whether it's in the United States or in Europe or in China. You know there's going to be big economic risks. You know there will be recessions and market corrections and political instability. You know it, but you have no idea when. It could happen today. It could happen 10 years from now. We might have a lot of stability for the next 20 years. Nobody knows. And so when you know bad things are never going to happen, but you don't know when, it really leads you towards a different view of risk, of rather than saying, how can I predict what's going to happen this year, which virtually nobody can do with any kind of accuracy. It moves you towards saying, how can I create a financial system for myself and my family or my business that is going to be the most resilient, regardless of what's going to happen in the future? It's a very different way of thinking about risk, but I think it is much more realistic in a world where the biggest risk and the timing of when that risk is going to happen is always unknown.
Yeah, sure. You're absolutely true. And on this, because you spoke about market crashes, and my second question was related to the to market crashes that you wrote in the book that happens. We know the statistics more or less every 5 to 7 years. Today, we are seeing probably a small correction for now because market has a drawdown or more or less 10%. But it's very incredible that people are worried, are scared every time, even if they know the statistics and these numbers. So how can we explain this kind of approach to the markets?
Yeah, there is an irony that every past market decline, if you look historically, looks like an opportunity, but every future market decline looks like a risk that you want to avoid. There's a big disconnect there in terms of how people think about it. It is very understandable. I understand why people fret about market declines, because market declines are usually attached to some sort of uncertainty in the world that can be scary. So right now, it is tied to tariffs, which is a real thing that will impact a lot of people in a real way. In 2022, the big market decline was attached to the fact that inflation in the United States and around the world was way higher than anybody thought it would happen. And then you talk about the declines in 2020 because of COVID, in 2001 because of September 11th terrorist attacks. Usually the market will decline because there is something very real and tangible happening that people should probably worry about. So it's not to say that like all worry in the market is unjustified. That's not it. It's just this realization that the reason the stock market tends to do well over the long period of time is because you have to put up with that uncertainty. It's because you have to deal with that fear and not knowing when those returns are going to come. Your ability to put up with that and endure that is why you're being paid a higher long-term return. So it's not to say that like, oh, everyone's panicking and they shouldn't be. It's really not that, because everyone has a different risk tolerance and the world is very uncertain and fragile. It's just this realization that your willingness to endure that is why you will do well over the long term.
Yeah, even on this is absolutely right. Even if right now we are waiting for the Trump tariffs, so everyone is scared. So at the end, asset allocation strategy, dollar cost average, everyone needs to manage the things that people and investors can control. So it's very, very important to approach the market like this. And I would like to end this amazing interview with one question that you posted in the list in the final part of your book, same as ever. And let me translate it because I have it here. That is, What are we ignoring, referred to the financial market today, that will seem shockingly obvious in the future? So for you, what will be?
I think almost by definition, you can't answer that question. Because if I could answer it, then we would not be ignoring it. It'd be something that everyone's paying attention to. If there is a known risk that is like a real thing, and people know about it, but we're probably underestimating its power because it plays out so slowly, is demographics around the world. So the birth rate in the United States, in Europe, in China, in Japan, in South Korea, every major industrialized country has a much lower birth rate today than they did at any point in the last 100 years. And that will have a massive impact over the next 100 years. All economic growth comes from either population growth or productivity growth. That's how you grow an economy. You either have more people or you make those people more productive. That's it. And we are taking half of that equation, population growth, and in a lot of these places, it's not only zero, it's negative. So in China, China's working age population, which is age 16 to 64, the working age cohort, that population will decline by 200 million people between now and 2050. It's enormous. And there's really no precedent for that in modern history. We know it's going to have a major impact on growth, but it's easy to ignore because it's slow. It's not something that's going to impact the market today or this week or this quarter. This is like a 50 or 100-year story. So even though it's massive, it's easy to underappreciate because it's so slow moving.
Yeah. Let me ask you just one little final question, because you know that we are talking to our Italian investor, and which kind of suggestion, if you have to give one last important suggestion regarding the financial market from Morgan Housel, what can you tell to us?
I think it's important to understand your own personal risk tolerance and the recognition that mine is probably different than yours, which is different from somebody else's, that it's a very individualistic pursuit. And, one criticism that I've had for both of my books is, Morgan, you wrote those books through the lens of a white American male. And it's like, well, of course, that's because who I am. But what's important to take away from that is there might be other cultures, other countries, other generations, or other people who have a very different view of risk than I do, have a very different view of long-term growth and what it means to live a good life than I do. And that's 100%, that's not only okay, that is a great realization, to realize that risk tolerance and your financial goals are very individualistic. You really have to figure it out for yourself. And there are some universal guidelines and rules about investing, but beyond those universal guidelines, you really have to figure it out for yourself in an individualistic way.
Yeah, totally agree. And Morgan, thanks so much for your answers. It has been a very pleasure to have you here. And I hope that you enjoyed the interview, and hope to see you next time. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.